Only one hero stepped forward. The inspiring cleaner who jumped into a drain to save a millionaire. Carlos had spent years scrubbing floors and collecting trash, pouring sweat and grit into every shift. Today, he was a humble cleaner, yet the pulsing heart of San Francisco echoed the pride in his work. He had a family to support, a wife and a young son who depended on him. His grandfather's lessons of character and humanity resonated deep in his soul, reminding him that strength didn't come from wealth but from virtue. But it was hard to feel seen in a city like this, full of skyscrapers and sharp ambition, as towering as the expectations around him. The bustling streets he cleaned, they belonged to someone else, people climbing and striving, oblivious to the sacrificial work of those like him. Sitting on the bus, he would catch glimpses of families, their kids laughing freely, while his heart tugged with the weight of his responsibility to provide more than he himself had. If only he could give his son a brighter future, a worthy dream in a world heavy with disparities. Then, as dark clouds gathered ominously over the horizon one fateful afternoon, a torrential downpour transformed San Francisco. The streets turned into raging rivers, as if the city itself was being swallowed. Carlos, drenched and exhausted, made his way home through the chaos, the storm obscuring paths he had walked 100 times. Sirens wailed, ushering in a fear that coiled in the air. Suddenly, he heard frantic shouts echoing from a storm drain. His chest tightened, instinct pulling him closer, a realization dawning. The trapped voice belonged to Ethan, a millionaire celebrated for his philanthropy, but shielded from the harsh realities breathing as life for the underprivileged. Backed by wealth and privilege, he seemed untouchable. Yet now he was just a man in peril. The water rose fiercely. The crowd fell into murmurs. It was chaotic. It was ugly. Some staked their voices to argue, suggesting that he wasn't worth it, that risking a life for someone like Ethan seemed futile. Carlos felt the fire in their words, but also the anger rising in him. Who were they to judge the worth of a life? He remembered his grandfather. He remembered what being human meant. Every life mattered, no matter their status. His heart raced as he glanced back to see his son watching him. Fear glimmered in the boy's eyes. Uncertainty etched into his face. Could he explain to him why he had to help? Could he risk losing that trust for a stranger? Yet the weight of the decision loomed as oppressive as the storm clouds above. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Swallowing his fear, Carlos made a choice. He couldn't let a man drown because of privilege. It was time to act. With one powerful leap, he plunged into the icy chaos of the swirling waters, every instinct screaming at him to survive. His heart pounded, adrenaline surged, a beacon of hope pushing him forward as he fought against the currents to reach Ethan. The community, watched with breath held tight in their throats. Gasps echoed as he struggled. Some stirred to hope, while others remained skeptical, torn between indifference and newfound admiration. The tides of change could flow from this moment. Would Carlos's bravery be enough to overcome not just nature's fury, but the deep divides of social prejudice? Battling the waters, Carlos caught sight of Ethan, his frame struggling against the onslaught. Just as Carlos extended his hand, the flood's roar reverberated through the streets, leaving the question lingering in the drenched air. Could one man's courage stitch together the frayed hearts of a community, or would they be swept away in their own biases? The icy grip of the water numbed Carlos as he fought against the current. Panic swirled around him, but he focused intently on the figure of Ethan, thrashing helplessly just a few feet away. Each stroke he took felt like wading through thick mud, yet the urgency pushed him onward. He could see Ethan's eyes wide with fear, fingers clawing at the slick, metal edges of the drain. "Hold on," Carlos shouted, his voice barely rising above the deafening roar of the rain and rushing water. Time seemed to stretch. With determination etched onto his face, Carlos stretched out his hand. The space between them felt vast, filled with currents that held the weight of their differences. Carlos's heart hammered, not just from the physical struggle, but from the critical question echoing in his mind. Could he truly pull the millionaire to safety? Ethan gasped, recognizing the desperate swimmer battling through the flood. For a flicker of a second, understanding flashed between them. In that chaotic moment, the barriers of class, fortune, and reputation began to dissolve into the water swirling around them. Carlos finally reached Ethan, feeling the slick fabric of his suit as he grasped his wrist. It was a shallow connection, but it came with a promise. "I've got you," he breathed, squeezing tightly, pulling with all his might. The force of the water pushed back, threatening to tear them apart. But Carlos was fueled by something deeper than survival. He was fighting for a belief that all lives mattered, an ancient truth handed down through generations. "Just trust me," he urged, locking eyes with the struggling man. With every ounce of strength, they began to move together. The current was fierce, angry at the audacity of the man jumping without a second thought. Carlos used his legs to kick harder, his feet searching for the unseen foothold below. The water surged as if conspiring against them, but he wouldn't let go. On the shore, the crowd watched in stunned silence, hearts racing. Some were crying out words of encouragement, while others shook their heads, still caught up in the debate of whether this was a fool's errand. But one little voice broke through Carlos's son, standing at the front, eyes wide with hope. "Dad, you can do it." Carlos's heart surged with pride at that sweet shout. If he could show his son what true courage meant, what it means to be truly human, it would be worth everything. With one last push, they reached the edge. Carlos pulled Ethan up, clawing onto the rubble, and with a final gasp, they broke the surface, gasping for air. Spluttering and cold, the roar of the storm began to fade as the warmth of humanity surged in their chests. Ethan lay on the ground, breathless and broken, but alive. Around them, the crowd erupted into cheers, voices rising against the drumming rain. Carlos, soaked and weary, looked around, searching for his son's face. "Dad!" the boy cried, running towards him. In that moment, all the barriers melted away. No longer was Carlos just a cleaner. In that act of bravery, he had become a hero. But as the cheers faded into the distance, whispers began to rise again, not about who he was, but what it would mean for them both moving forward. Would this act of heroism change anything, or would Carlos and Ethan return to the shadows of a world divided by wealth? With hope kindling in his heart, but uncertainty lingering in the air, Carlos caught Ethan's eye. "What now?" he murmured, both knowing that this was just the beginning of a conversation far more significant than either could yet comprehend. What new revelations awaited them as they emerged from the storm? The weight of the moment pressed against Carlos like the relentless rain pouring from the sky. Ethan, gasping for breath, looked over at Carlos with wide eyes. They were no longer mere strangers. They shared a bond forged in the chaos of the rushing water. As people swarmed around them, shouting questions and praise, the reality of their situation began to settle like a heavy fog. "Thank you," Ethan stammered, his luxurious suit drenched and heavy. The words felt inadequate, stripped of the glamour that normally framed his life. "You saved me." Carlos managed a nod, still trying to catch his breath. As the adrenaline began to fade, the sheer exhaustion wrapped around him like a blanket. He felt the heat of his son's small hand grasping his fingers, a reminder of home, of safety. The crowd started to swarm closer, faces marked with curiosity and concern. Phones pointed at them, capturing every moment for social media. Yet, in that electric atmosphere, Carlos felt more exposed than ever. He was pulled from the shadows and into the glaring light of public scrutiny. "Look, it's the hero of the day," shouted a voice from the crowd. Some clapped, some questioned. A few whispered harshly about the millionaire's reckless behavior, blaming Ethan for what had happened. Carlos's heart sank at their words. He glanced down at his son, whose eyes sparkled with admiration. The boy had once looked up to superheroes on TV, but now, he saw his father standing there, soaked and weary. "What's wrong, Dad?" the boy asked, tilting his head. "Nothing, son," Carlos replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just pretending it's another day at work." Ethan, still lying on the gritty ground, managed to push himself up and look at the crowd. It wasn't just me who was in danger, he said, his voice shaky but gaining strength. He risked his life to save mine. All of us, we're lucky to have him here. The crowd's murmurs shifted, some faces showing newfound respect. But Carlos sensed the flicker of skepticism lingering beneath the praise. Heroism doesn't erase the chasms between men, he thought, and though one act of bravery had pulled him from anonymity, it wouldn't last. Among the dozens of voices, one woman stepped forward, a reporter whose pen danced over her notepad. So, Carlos, what does this mean for you now? Do you expect a reward for your bravery? The question bemused him. Carlos, suddenly keenly aware of the world watching him, thought about his own bills waiting on the kitchen counter, the rent that was always due, and the dreams he cherished for his son's future. I don't need a reward, he replied honestly. Just want to get home. The reporter frowned, clearly expecting something more provocative. But Carlos wasn't playing that game. His heart belonged to those he loved, and he had already won that battle today. As the crowd began to dissipate, Ethan reached out, a newfound respect blooming between them. You could be something more than this, than just a cleaner, he breathed, hope glowing in his voice. But Carlos shook his head gently. I'm just a man, Ethan. Everyone has their role to play. Mine happens to be cleaning. But I don't just clean windows, I try to clear the views between people, too. Ethan's expression shifted, shadows passing over his face. Maybe we can do more than that. Together. Would their paths truly intertwine after this day, or would it all melt away like the rain that had poured over them? As Carlos felt a swell of possibility, he thought of the walls constructed by wealth and privilege. There was something fragile yet beautiful in the air, and Carlos now stood on the brink of a new journey. Together, they could challenge the perceptions written in stone. But how? What would it take to tear down the walls and build bridges instead? The storm had passed, but a new tempest was brewing, one of choice, courage, and the power to change. The next few days were a blur for Carlos. His phone buzzed incessantly, filled with calls from reporters, and the town was alive with chatter about the hero who saved a millionaire. His face was everywhere on television, in newspapers, social media. Yet, every time he saw his image, he felt a mix of pride and disquiet. Ethan had insisted on meeting again, wanting to discuss some ideas to raise awareness about drowning prevention. Carlos had returned to his daily routine, but Ethan's invitation lingered, striking a chord deep inside. Perhaps this could be something more than cleaning windows. Perhaps he was meant to open doors to conversations that mattered. As he sat on the creaky bus heading towards the coffee shop where they agreed to meet, Carlos watched city life flow by. He caught glimpses of familiar faces, neighbors rushing to work, kids trailing behind their parents, the elderly crossing streets with careful determination. It was the everyday struggles that grounded him. On a rainy Tuesday, he entered the shop, the warm aroma of coffee wrapping around him like a cozy blanket. The chatter of patrons filled the air, creating a comforting backdrop. He spotted Ethan at a table, his face animated as he spoke to someone on his phone. Carlos felt a flicker of nerves in his stomach, questioning his place at that table. Hey, Carlos, Ethan said, his eyes lighting up when he saw him. He quickly wrapped up his call and gestured for Carlos to join him. Thanks for coming. Of course, Carlos replied, still hesitant as he took a seat. He noticed Ethan's designer watch, the crispness of his shirt, and the way he seemed so at ease in this world. What do you want to talk about? Ethan leaned in, excitement glowing in his eyes. I want to create an initiative. We could team up to educate the community about water safety, maybe even organize some workshops. What do you think? The thought of taking on such a task set off a whirlwind of emotions. That sounds big, Carlos said slowly. You really think we could make a difference? Ethan grinned, his enthusiasm infectious. Absolutely. You have first-hand experience, and people trust you now. Plus, I can leverage my connections. This could be huge, and it could help so many people. Carlos chewed on his bottom lip, uncertainty gripping him. I'm just a cleaner, Ethan. I've never led something like this. But you are so much more than that. You showed courage when it mattered most. You connected with people in a way that most don't. I've heard echoes of your story everywhere. There was a fire in Ethan's voice, a conviction that pulled Carlos closer. But what if I fail? He couldn't help but voice his fear, the nagging doubt that had lingered in the back of his mind. What if you don't? Ethan shot back, determination lacing his words. Every small step we take can build to something big. All heroes start somewhere. Those words hung in the air, a shimmering strand of hope that swayed between them. Carlos felt a rush of warmth rise inside him, a deep yearning for something greater, for a purpose that reached beyond his immediate world. For the first time, he could picture it. Workshops packed with families eager to learn, children feeling safe and aware by the poolside, and drowning statistics finally decreasing because they had taken a stand together. "Okay," he finally said, heart racing. "Let us do it." Ethan beamed, and for the first time in a long while, Carlos felt a surge of excitement bubbling inside. As they began to outline their vision, a feeling of possibility spread through him like sunshine breaking through dark clouds. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered. Could he truly rise above who he was known to be? Would the world let him? Before he could dwell on it, a loud crash outside the cafe pulled both their attentions. They rushed to the window, and as they peered out, they witnessed a scene that sent a chill down their spines. A car had skidded off the slick road, heading straight towards the riverbank. What would happen next? Would Carlos step up once more in a moment that might define him forever? The car spun wildly, tires screeching against the pavement, and in that instant, time seemed to freeze. Carlos felt his heart pounding, a whirlwind of emotions surging through him, a jolt of fear, vivid memories of his last life-or-death moment crashing back. The world outside faded, his gaze narrowing on the scene unfolding before him. Ethan's voice broke through the chaos. "We need to do something." Without thinking, Carlos pushed through the door and into the rain-soaked street, adrenaline fueling his every move. The icy droplets cascaded across his skin, but he barely noticed. His breath came in sharp gasps as he raced towards the riverbank, the roar of the engine blaring in his ears. "Carlos, wait!" Ethan shouted from behind, but there was no time for hesitation. He had been a bystander once, and the weight of doing nothing pressed down on his chest like a stone. As he reached the bank, he saw the horrifying sight of the car teetering on the edge, the driver struggling against the windshield, panic etched across his face. Carlos's mind raced. He couldn't exactly recall how he had found the courage last time, but he knew that this was different. This wasn't about being a hero. This was about saving a life. "Help!" The driver yelled, his voice breaking. Desperation rang clear in his cries. Carlos glanced back, spotting Ethan, eyes wide with fear, but determination creeping in. "Call for help," he shouted over the noise. Now, Carlos approached the edge carefully. The water roared below, churning and ready to swallow anything it could catch. He took a deep breath, his heart a wild drum in his chest. As the car shifted, tilted further toward the water, Carlos felt a surge of instinct. He couldn't just stand by and watch. He ran forward, slid down the muddy embankment, and reached for the door handle. "Stay calm," he yelled, not sure who he was trying to reassure, himself or the driver. With a yanked grip, the door finally gave way, swinging open to reveal the driver, eyes filled with terror and disbelief. "I can't get out," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper above the chaos. "Climb over the seat, I'll grab you," Carlos shouted, extending his hand. He could feel the muddy ground slipping beneath him, every moment stretching like hours. His hands trembled, but he tightened his grip around the man's wrist, focusing on pulling him free. The driver scrambled, panic setting in as the car lurched dangerously closer to the water's edge. Finally, with a single jolt, he lunged toward Carlos, who managed to grasp him securely. And in that moment, it felt as if everything slowed. They were locked in a struggle against nature, and Carlos realized that their lives were linked by a fragile thread of hope. As the car bucked again, both men tumbled to the ground, rolling to safety just moments before the vehicle plunged into the raging water. Gasping, they lay on the muddy grass, rain pouring down around them. Ethan stood nearby, eyes wide with disbelief, yet a spark of pride flashing across his face. Carlos's heart raced. They did it. And even as his body ached, he felt the warmth of triumph bloom within him. But then, as the initial surge of relief washed over him, another thought crashed in. What had he just set in motion? How far would this act take him? As the sirens wailed in the distance, Carlos turned to Ethan, searching for confirmation. Would this be the moment that defined who he was becoming? "Carlos, you..." But they were interrupted by a woman rushing forward, frantically searching for those inside the car. The world around them spun into a flurry of activity. "Stay here," he shouted to Ethan, racing to the woman, sensing more chaos was about to unfold. What lay ahead was unknown, but one thing was clear. Carlos had crossed a threshold, and there would be no going back. What would the next chapter of his life hold? Would he seize this chance, or let it slip through his fingers? Carlos pushed through the crowd that had gathered, instinctively searching for the woman's frantic eyes. She looked lost, her hands clasping at her chest as anxiety twisted her features. "Where's my son?" she cried out, desperation dripping from her voice. The words pierced Carlos, echoing in the chaos around him. His heart ached with the weight of her fear. "He is not in the car. I promise," Carlos shouted, trying to anchor her in the moment. "He is safe. We got the driver out." Ethan joined them, breathless and wide-eyed. "I called 911, he said, heart thundering. "They're on their way." The woman's face transformed briefly, a flicker of hope igniting before shadows of fear crept back. "But my son was in the front seat. He was just—" Her voice fell low, breaking on the edges. Carlos's mind raced. Could there still be someone? Had he missed something in the chaos? A knot twisted in his stomach as he scanned the water's edge once more. "We need to make sure," he said, urgency washing over him. "I'll check the car." "No." Ethan grabbed his arm, eyes wide in protest. "It's too dangerous. We can't risk you." "I can't just stand here," Carlos snapped back, anger mixing with desperation. There could be a child. The blood rushed in his ears as he moved, ignoring Ethan's protests. He swallowed hard, thoughts cascading over one another. What if there was someone left behind? Every step felt like a sprint against time. Rain hammered down, but it faded into the background. All that mattered was the potential for saving a life. Carlos approached the wreckage again, peering cautiously over the riverbank. The wrecked vehicle was still, submerged partially in water. What if the child was still there, somewhere trapped in that small space? A surge of determination flooded through him, pushing his fear aside. He could hear Ethan shouting in the distance, "Carlos, get back here." But the sound melted into the roar of the river, louder than any voice. "Help!" The single word rung out again, not from the driver, but from deeper within the vehicle, audible above the sound of the raging water. Carlos froze, heart thumping wildly. "Stay back," Ethan shouted, scrambling down the embankment. "There is nothing we can do." But every instinct pulled Carlos forward. "I hear someone," he yelled, his voice breaking through the storm. "They're still inside." He lowered himself closer, gripping the edge of the car. "Can you hear me?" he shouted, hands shaking. "Hold on. I'm coming." In the depths of his panic, Carlos saw a glimmer of movement, a tiny hand reaching for him through the broken window. Time stopped again as he wrapped his fingers around that fragile grip. It was small, almost delicate. "Don't be afraid," Carlos yelled, adrenaline surging through him again. "You're going to be okay." The child whimpered, the panic palpable even through the drenched half of the car. Carlos gritted his teeth, focusing on the challenge ahead. He had to pull this child out, to bring light to a situation that threatened to drown them all in despair. But then a suffocating doubt flooded in. What if he couldn't? What if his efforts were in vain? He couldn't think about that. "Not now. Grab my hand," Carlos commanded, pulling harder against the weight of water and metal. "I've got you." As he steadied himself, preparing for the struggle ahead, a thought crossed his mind. Would this decision define him as a man? Just then, a hand clamped around his wrist. Carlos's breath caught. He had to make this count. He had to pull them both to safety. And as he heaved, just at the moment he thought hope might finally be slipping, a fleeting, burning desire ignited within him. Could he be more than just a bystander? With renewed strength, he gritted his teeth and pulled with all his might, ready to face whatever came next. As life thrummed through his veins, he wondered, would he find the courage to be the hero he never knew he could be? And then the ground trembled beneath him. The ground shook again, sending a rush of fear through Carlos. He could feel the mud shift beneath his feet, the earth threatening to slide away. Panic surged, but he couldn't back down now. Not when there was a child depending on him. "Ethan," he cried, his voice strained, "help me." Ethan's face was a mask of fear and determination as he scrambled closer. "What do I do?" he yelled, trying to keep his own balance on the slick embankment. "Get ready to pull. I need to get them up out of this car." Carlos gripped the tiny hand tightly, waiting for the moment of strength he needed. With both hands wrapped around the child's wrist, he felt the tiny heartbeat flutter weakly beneath his fingers. "I don't know if I can do this," Ethan murmured, staring at the tumultuous river, the water crashing mercilessly against the rocks. "Trust me," Carlos managed to say, his voice slightly more steady. "Once I get them up, you have to pull us both back. You can do it." The child whimpered again, fear lacing their small voice. Carlos focused on that sound, that soft plea for help, and it filled him with a ferocious energy. He couldn't let this child down. Not now. With all the force he could muster, Carlos clenched his teeth and heaved. The metal shifted slightly, but it wasn't enough. It was as if the vehicle had a hold on the child, dragging them into the depths of despair. "Come on. You can do this," he yelled, adrenaline and desperation mingling in his voice. The tiny hand gripped tighter. On three. 1, 2, 3. He pulled with everything he had. The child's body began to move, slowly at first, then faster as hope flared within Carlos. With Ethan beside him, bracing for the surge, they yanked hard. "Let us go," Carlos shouted, and with a final jolt, the child popped through the window, gasping for air. Carlos didn't even process how it felt to hold this small life before him. His focus narrowed down to one thing, one mission. "Now pull," he barked at Ethan, who grabbed the child's other arm. Together, they heaved until they felt solid ground beneath them. The moment was a whirlwind of sound and motion, the voices of the crowd distantly cheering, the roar of the river fading as adrenaline flooded Carlos's senses. Closer now to safety, Carlos gripped the child with both hands, feeling the warmth of their small body against his as he rolled onto the bank, pulling the child into his broad chest. "Are you okay?" Carlos whispered urgently, his heart racing. The child stared up at him, eyes wide and filled with tears. Carlos could see the fear reflected in their gaze, but he also sensed a spark of hope there. "Water, it was so cold," the child murmured, voice shaky, but a smile broke through the fear. Relief flooded through Carlos like a raging river. "You're safe now. We've got you." He turned to find Ethan's hands trembling beside him, a mix of disbelief and joy swimming in his eyes. Carlos couldn't help but join him in a moment of shared triumph. They had done it. But before they could catch their breath, the crowd surged closer, faces filled with concern. Among them stood the frantic mother, eyes darting around, desperate for her child. "Where's my son?" she cried, agony twisting her features once more. "I got him," Carlos shouted, waving the child in his arms. "He is safe." The woman let out a strangled cry of relief, rushing toward them. But just as she reached out, the little boy burst into tears, collapsing against Carlos. "Let us get you both out of here," Ethan urged, a protective urgency now clawing at his voice. But as they stood there, wrapped in the mix of joy and chaos, a shadow passed over Carlos's heart. This was not just a rescue. It was a moment that would change everything. "Are you ready for this?" he wondered, sensing the gravity of what he had done. As the sirens blared in the distance, ominous yet reassuring, Carlos couldn't shake off the feeling that bigger waves were about to crash into their lives. What consequences awaited him for stepping forward today? The ground trembled again, but this time it was only the heartbeats of those around him, quickening in anticipation. Could he handle whatever would come next? Would the world still see him as just a cleaner, or had he become something more? Carlos stood there, the weight of the rescued child still nestled against him. The flood of relief was quickly overshadowed by the sharp edges of reality. He had acted, yes, but the energy of the moment was quickly dissipating, leaving a brittle silence in its wake. The distraught mother collapsed to her knees, clutching her son. Her tears flowed freely as she rocked him in a gentle embrace, whispering apologies mixed with gratitude. The boy, still trembling, squeezed his mother tight, oblivious to the chaotic aftermath. Around them, the crowd shifted, murmurs rising and falling like the waves behind them. Some people looked on in awe, while others had their phones out, capturing the unexpected heroism of the moment. Carlos felt a heat rise to his cheeks. He didn't want to be noticed. He wasn't a hero. He was just a cleaner who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. That Ethan's voice broke through the noise. "We need to get them out of here." He grabbed Carlos's shoulder, grounding him. "Let us move, man. They'll be pulling in more emergency teams soon." Carlos nodded, still dazed. He pushed himself to his feet and carefully set the boy down, crouching to meet his gaze. "You're gonna be okay, buddy," he said, trying to convey strength, though doubts knotted in his stomach. The child nodded, but the fear in his eyes remained. It was a familiar feeling one Carlos had often seen in his own life, a reminder that sometimes safety felt like just an illusion. "Mama, I'm scared," the boy whimpered, reaching for his mother again. Carlos straightened up and looked at Ethan, who seemed equally unsettled. They needed to move quickly, but how? The crowd was thick, and the path to the parking area was unclear amidst the chaos of rescue vehicles and onlookers. "Let us find the parents," Carlos said, urgency pulling him forward. "They need to know the boy is okay." Together, they wove through the crowd, pushing past amazed faces and people who either craned their necks for a glimpse of the miraculous rescue or offered hushed congratulations as they approached the sobbing mother, her eyes lifted, filled with gratitude. But then shadows flickered across her face as she scrutinized Carlos. You did that? You pulled him out?" Carlos felt the heat rush back to his face. I was there," he stuttered, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you for my son. Thank you for being there when I couldn't." Carlos found himself trapped under the weight of her gratitude. He wasn't sure how to respond, how to accept praise he felt he didn't deserve. A tight knot formed in his throat that a paramedic brushed past, barking orders to others as he guided them to prepare for further assessments. "Let us get him checked out," he said. The mother pulled her son close, reluctant to let him go. "I just want to know he is safe," she whispered. Carlos glanced back at Ethan, who offered an encouraging nod. That same fire of determination flickered in him again. This was bigger than them. What they had done mattered. As the commotion swelled behind them, a thought struck Carlos, sharp and insistent. What if this was merely the beginning? He felt an urge ignite within him and need to do more, to be more. Then he heard it, a voice that pierced through the noise, loud enough to draw attention. Carlos, you're finally being recognized." He turned to see a news crew approaching, cameras swinging toward him. The reporter, a familiar face from the local news, pointed eagerly. "Can we talk to you? The community is buzzing about your bravery." And just like that, everything shifted. As camera lights flickered to life, Carlos' heart raced. He was no longer just a cleaner. He was being pulled into something far more complicated. Could he truly handle this? Or would the moment consume him whole? The ground trembled again beneath him, a deep echo of the past that dragged him back into a place of fear and uncertainty. With the eyes of the public now on him, the questions loomed larger than ever. What had he really signed up for today? As the chatter grew around him, he wondered if he would be able to step up again when it mattered most. What awaited him next would test everything he thought he knew about himself. Would he be the hero everyone seemed to think he was, or would he slip back into the shadows? Carlos felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him, a tidal wave of expectations that threatened to pull him under. The reporter moved closer, her camera capturing every flicker of uncertainty that crossed his face. "How does it feel to be hailed as a hero?" she asked, her voice a mix of excitement and urgency. What could he say? I didn't do it for glory, he thought, but that truth felt inadequate. He managed a weak smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I just did what anyone would do," he replied. The reporter pressed on, undeterred. "But it's more than that. You saved a child's life. What motivated you?" Each question weighed heavier than the last, complicating the moment. In the back of his mind, a chill crept in. What did that make him really? A hero? Nothing about that felt right. He didn't want the pedestal. He just wanted to blend back into the background, back to his ordinary life, sweeping floors and cleaning windows. Ethan stepped in, sensing the storm brewing. He placed a hand on Carlos's shoulder, giving it a squeeze. Carlos is modest. He saw someone in trouble and didn't hesitate to help. He interjected, looking at his friend with pride. That's what matters. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd at Ethan's words. They hadn't just witnessed a rescue. They were witnessing a transformation. A flood of whispers intensified around them, and Carlos could feel the scrutiny like 1,000 eyes boring into him. Suddenly, he noticed a woman near the front of the crowd. Her red eyes glistened, and he recognized her face. It was the girl from the back who had shouted encouragement while he was rescuing the boy. She broke through the throng, rushing toward him. "You're amazing," she yelled, her voice filled with emotion. Taken aback, Carlos blinked, caught in an unexpected wave of admiration. Wasn't he used to this? Hadn't he felt this kind of attention before? Was he really someone worth admiring? The doubts clawed at him, strong and relentless. "Everyone needs a hero," she continued, her hands clasped in front of her. "You gave that boy a second chance. What else could you do?" A lump formed in Carlos's throat. He didn't want to let anyone down. This feeling was overwhelming. The weight of possibility, of what could be, felt heavier than the boy he had saved. What if he failed? What if he couldn't live up to this new version of himself? Then he locked eyes with the boy's mother again. She was still cradling her son, the look in her eyes a mixture of gratitude and hope. In that moment, the part of him that had always dimmed pushed through the doubt. He could be more than just a cleaner. He could be a champion for those who felt powerless. But just when Carlos felt the shift inside him, the day turned ominous. Loud sirens began to echo through the air. More emergency vehicles were arriving. Officers surged into the crowd, pushing back onlookers, creating a wave of urgency. "What is happening?" Carlos asked, the chaos catching him off guard. Ethan looked at him, concern etched in his features. "There are reports of more people trapped. Carlos, they might need us again." The realization struck Carlos hard. This moment could shift once more. He could choose to stand still, or he could take another leap forward. His heart raced at the thought. Was he ready to face another storm? To act again when every instinct was screaming at him to withdraw? But he caught a glimpse of the boy, cradled in his mother's arms, and felt a resolve begin to spark. Could he become the hero he didn't believe he could be? Or would he falter at the moment of truth when the call came again? With urgency thrumming in the air, Carlos steadied himself as the space around them turned electric with emotion. The crowd swayed, faces aflame with admiration, while the sirens wailed, echoing the chaos unfolding just beyond the riverbank. Each sound tugged at his heart, reminding him of lives in peril. The weight of hope hung thick in the stormy sky. Ethan turned to him, his eyes lit with determination. "We've already done it once. We can't just stand around now. They need us." Carlos met his gaze, fear battling with courage. In that moment, the echo of his grandfather's words resonated. The fight for dignity, for every life, it surged within him like the warm glow of a new dawn breaking after a long night. That a shout rang out from the chaos. "Help! We need help over here." A couple of officers waved, their expressions taut as they enumerated the emergency. Carlos felt a rush of clarity. This was not just about him anymore. It was about families, about making sure no one was left behind in the wash of indifference. He took a step forward, adrenaline coursing through him. "Let us go." Carlos and Ethan hurried toward the sounds of distress, weaving through the throng of spectators and excitement-charged reporters. Every heartbeat felt synchronized with the rhythm of their shared mission. The closer they got, the more they felt the urgency lifting around them, and suddenly they were in the front lines of a real crisis. They reached a cluster of paramedics fumbling to assist a family caught in the wreckage of a collapsed street structure. Gasps strained against the backdrop of panic as Carlos saw a young woman kneeling, her arm pinned beneath debris. "Please," she cried, an unadulterated mix of fear and anguish carved across her face. "I can't move." The sight shot straight to Carlos's core. He hardly thought. He dove into action. "Ethan, we can't wait." He motioned for his friend, voice steady and resolute. "We need to lift this board." "She can't wait." Ethan nodded, fear flashing in his eyes, but resolve surged with each passing second. They both approached the debris, pushing through the haze of onlookers, adrenaline colafizz in their veins. There was no hesitation now. It was just them, united in newfound purpose. "On three," Carlos called. 1, 2, 3. Together they heaved with everything they had, straining against their own bodies and the chaos that surrounded them. They were not alone. More hands joined as onlookers felt the change wash through the crowd. A collective heart beat as one out with a heavy grunt. The board finally shifted, and the paramedics rushed forward. "We have you, just hold on." They guided her into safety. Carlos grinned as the woman was freed, and amidst all the noise, her eyes met his, a spark of gratitude that ignited his heart like a furnace. Thank you," she murmured, tears cascading down her face, mingling with the rain. You didn't have to. And yet you did. Carlos nodded, breathless, allowing the moment to sink in. He could feel the warmth of change creeping in like the sun after a dark storm, illuminating the path laid before him. They didn't just save lives. They forged connections that transcended class or status. They shared their humanity right then and there, and it felt electric. But the chaos hadn't finished with them. As the paramedics began to stabilize the situation, a voice cut through Charlie's thoughts, echoing loud like a roar. "Over here. We need help with a child." Carlos's heart sank. It seemed the storm had left one last challenge to face. With no time to think, he turned to Ethan, who met his gaze with a knowing nod. "Let us do this." Rushing towards the sound, they witnessed a boy struggling in the debris, his small body trapped under a pile of shattered wood. Time slowed as Carlos felt panic grip his chest, but he quickly shook it off. No more hesitating. He had made promises, not just to himself, but to those who believed they were powerless. "Stay calm. I'll get you out," Carlos called, reaching down, lifting debris as he worked to free the small figure. The boy's eyes struck him, terrified yet hopeful, and Carlos felt a weight of responsibility. This was a moment that mattered. Together, Carlos and Ethan wrestled the wood away, panic giving way to determination. With one final push, Carlos pulled the boy free, gasping with release as the child tumbled into his arms. "I got you," Carlos exclaimed, voice shaking but steady. The boy looked up at him, wide-eyed, confusion washing away as safety enveloped him like a warm blanket. "Dad!" he cried, spotting a man bursting through the crowd, face drawn tight with worry. The boy leaped into his father's arms, and the explosive wave of relief washed over everyone. Amidst it all, Carlos caught Ethan's eye. They stood together, breathless and wet, yet anchored in their shared experience, two men linked by a moment that defied the disparity of their worlds apart. "Did we really just do that?" Carlos murmured, heart swelling with disbelief and satisfaction. Ethan beamed, "Yes. And look at what it's done for everyone. Look at how we pulled together." As the cheers erupted from the crowd and sirens faded in the background, Carlos felt a profound shift within him. It wasn't just a flash of triumph. It was the birth of a new purpose. In the days that followed, stories spread about the cleaner-turned-hero. But Carlos understood it was more than a title. He wasn't just a man sweeping floors anymore. He was shifting perspectives, helping to build bridges. And more importantly, he was working alongside Ethan to create change in their community, sharing knowledge, starting workshops, and educating families on safety. Days turned into weeks as they began to foster a movement fueled by compassion and understanding the way it was always meant to be. Carlos had found his calling. He was no longer hiding behind menial tasks, but stepping into a world where every action mattered. And so, Carlos stood today, a humble man. Yes, but one that had learned to recognize the greatness within his heart, able to change lives not just in an instant, but through dedication to the greater good. He watched children laughing and running through the park. A radiant smile broke through on his face. Family happiness swelled in his chest, the weight of responsibility now replaced by a sense of hope. "Let us keep building, one conversation at a time," he thought, glancing over at Ethan, who mirrored the sentiment. Because now they knew. They just had to keep stepping forward. Now, dear friends, it's your turn to step forward and be part of this inspiring journey. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes all the difference. Comment below with your reactions and feelings about how Carlos' transformation resonated with you. And don't wait not even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Your support helps spread the message that we can all be heroes in our own way.